Good evening, Professor Cortes. Nice for you to join us here today, and thank you for the amazing panel discussion earlier.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. So in recent years, there has been, I feel like, an explosion in media coverage and also public discourse about how the future of work might look like. So it might be daunting for many to actually cut through all of this noise. So my first question would be, what would be the key factors for you personally that you think that will drive the future of work?
Well, I think in terms of automation and new technologies, we know that technology is very good at performing certain specific types of tasks. So I think the main change that's going to come from that is that jobs are going to change in terms of the tasks that people perform. So we know that machines and new technologies are very good at performing tasks that are easy to codify, basically. So anything that follows like a very fixed set of rules, machines are very good at that. They have algorithms that let them perform that probably better than humans can. So it's quite clear that over the past years, there's certain types of occupations that involved a lot of these codifiable or routine tasks that are very good, machines are very good at. So we've seen a big change in the composition of jobs in the economy with a lot of these routine intensive occupations declining, and we've seen growth of occupations that are intensive in non-routine tasks. So either cognitive tasks that require some sort of common sense or some intelligence that machines do not yet possess, or also certain manual tasks that are maybe repetitive for a human, but not very easy to put into codifiable rules. So what's happened in terms of the composition of jobs is that we've seen this decline of routine occupations, which tend to be middle wage occupations. So we've seen a disappearance of middle wage jobs, and we've seen growth of non-routine jobs, which can either be very high paying or very low paying. At the top of the distribution, you have these non-routine cognitive jobs, which are professional and managerial jobs, which require a lot of analytical skills that machines don't really have. And at the bottom, you have a lot of jobs that do not require particularly a lot of skills and that are easy for humans, like cleaning or serving or things like that. But machines are not very good at either because these algorithms haven't been developed to deal with certain situations or because they require some sort of human interaction. So you see this change in the types of jobs that exist, but even for the same type of job, you see a change in the tasks that people perform. So even if you look at a very similar job title now versus 50 years ago, probably the type of things that people do are changing because they're working with a lot of...
I can imagine a secretary 30 years ago would look much more different than
exactly
working with procedures.
Exactly. So you see two things. First, you see fewer secretaries. It used to be that each professor had their own secretary and they would type up papers and things like that. Now we have computers, so we type our own papers. So you have fewer secretaries, and the things that a secretary does is probably very different. They're not going to be managing a calendar for an individual or typing something for someone. They're going to be doing other types of tasks aided by the technology. So obviously, the more you can work with technology, the better off you will be in this kind of new environment.
Yes. I would actually like to carry on with this. In your panel discussion, you were mentioning how certain groups of people, demographic groups of people, were more affected by these declining middle-skilled jobs than others. And especially you were mentioning unskilled male workers. And I was wondering, how would we manage to retrain these workers to acquire those skills that will be needed in the future as the task will change?
That's the million-dollar question, I guess. That's the key. Like how do we help the people who are affected by these negative impacts of technology? And there's not a very easy answer. I mean, there's an age dimension to this. So young male unskilled workers, you might try to encourage them to get more skills through different channels. With older workers, it's probably a lot more difficult because it's not like they're going to go and start training again if they're close to retirement age. The other thing that makes it even more difficult is that jobs tend to be concentrated in different areas. So a lot of these areas that had a lot of these routine jobs don't have a lot of alternative job opportunities in the local area. So for people to even find a non-routine job, they might not even be able to find it in their community. So these are big challenges.
Yeah. And with these regional differences, would that perhaps also be that these people might not be encouraged to acquire those skills because they don't actually see any of these employment opportunities there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the problems start already from like a young age. If you're growing up in an area that's deprived because a lot of the jobs have disappeared in recent decades, you don't see a lot of future in your area. You might not feel encouraged to invest in your education or your skills, and then that kind of snowballs because then as these people get older, they don't have the necessary skills. So it's definitely a difficult problem. I guess it's crucial to kind of try to equalize opportunities as much as possible. So try to give young people in these areas the best education possible. I mean, the problem is that often these areas have the worst schools and so on, so then that compounds the difficulties.
But that could be where public policy
exactly
could come into play.
Exactly, yeah.
And so far, implicit in our discussion was that only routine jobs can be automated. But in your work, you often separate jobs by the task content. So not only routine, non-routine, but also according to cognitive or manual skill level. And I suppose that it is very likely that in the future, machines will also be able to codify cognitive tasks. And they might even have higher emotional intelligence than humans. And at that point, what would be left for humans?
Yeah, so that's kind of what people are talking about with new artificial intelligence technologies, that they're going to be able to replace people in some of these highly skilled, non-routine cognitive tasks, so a lot of the professional jobs. I think that over history we've seen that jobs evolve and people's work evolves and new jobs come up that we don't even think of now. So a lot of IT jobs were unthinkable a few decades ago, and there's probably going to be some sort of new job that we can't even...
But isn't that also part of the problem, the uncertain future, that we don't know what to expect, and that is also a psychological burden on some people?
For sure, but I don't know if it's that different right now than what it was in the past. I mean, there's always been technological progress. There's always been changes in the composition of jobs in the economy. I don't think we've had like an extended period of time where the composition of jobs was stable and the task content was particularly stable. There's a perception, and perhaps somewhat justified, that things are changing faster and faster and people need to adapt. So for sure that creates kind of uncertainty for people and concerns. And we were talking about in the panel discussion how crucial adaptability is, being able to adapt to new situations and especially exploiting things that people are good at but machines are not. So anything related to interpersonal skills, there's a lot of growth in occupations that require interpersonal skills, and interpersonal skills are becoming more important in a lot of jobs. And even if machines come into a lot of these non-routine cognitive jobs, they usually help humans to perform their tasks. So a doctor might rely on a lot of technology, or a lawyer might rely on technology, but there's still going to be a need for I find it difficult to imagine that there's going to be no need for a human there, even if it's just because people want to interact with a person. Like you see the self-service checkouts, a lot of people hate them. So there's still demand for a person to put your groceries through and take your money. So I mean,
after all, we're all humans.
Exactly. So there's always some necessity of human interaction. But of course, the type of things that people do might change. But I don't think that non-routine cognitive jobs are probably not going to disappear. They're just going to change in terms of what people do.
Yes. And I guess in the future, humans will just need to adapt a bit faster. But in terms of the costs of adaptation and retraining, how large are these costs actually?
I'm sure they're quite large. I mean, it's hard to estimate, I guess, but there are large costs to retraining, but there's also a lot of gains from new technologies and increased productivity. So that's kind of where the concern is, in my view. Not that technology is going to make jobs disappear, but that it's going to increase inequality. So we see evidence that inequality has increased in most developed countries, and a lot of research links that to new technology. So there are people who lose their jobs and need retraining. There are also people who are really benefiting from technology and who have experienced huge gains in income. So there's an issue of redistribution there, of trying to make everyone better off rather than a small group benefiting and others not. So the retraining costs might be large, but there's also large gains being made in other parts of the economy. So hopefully there are ways to redistribute these resources so that everyone is better off. That's kind of the ideal scenario. Of course, there's challenges.
Yes, I guess that is the basic theory, that making the overall surplus larger than redistribution. But in the beginning of the panel discussion, we were mentioning that the notion of a job is much more than just a means of earning, but it's also a means of self-identification. So I guess this could also be a very large challenge for these people.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, if you've been doing a certain job your whole life and suddenly that job disappears and there's no employment in that type of job, that kind of challenges who you are, because then what are you going to do? And like, yeah, the job is a huge part of who people are. So the costs, I guess it's a valid point. The costs are not just the wage loss, but also there can be huge kind of psychological costs. And I mean, you see this in areas that have lost a lot of employment, that you see a lot of other social problems cropping up. It's not just the loss of earnings, it's that these deprived areas, a lot of other social problems appear. So again, I think the crucial thing is trying to redistribute the gains in some way, because if you let these areas just keep declining, it's just going to create bigger problems in the future for the country as a whole.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for this discussion.
Yeah, thank you.